In my first life, I saved my husband's life 4 separate times before the age of 32, and every single time, he thanked his mistress for the dinner that almost killed him. The shellfish allergy was severe, anaphylactic. One wrong bite and his throat would close in under 3 minutes. I was the one who carried the EpiPen in my handbag for 11 years. I was the one who screened every restaurant menu, who called ahead, who stood at catering tables checking ingredients, who whispered in his ear at every banquet, "Not the dumplings, darling, not the soup, not the sauce." He did not know half the times I saved him. His mistress did not know any of them. His mother believed he had simply grown out of it. He divorced me at 34 for the younger woman who could not tell a prawn from a peanut.
And I died 6 months later of pneumonia in a rental room with a single window. This time, I stopped carrying the EpiPen. I stopped reading the menus. I stopped whispering. I smiled when she invited him to the engagement party she was hosting for them in the house I used to live in. And I gave myself 7 rules. The first one was the simplest. Never warn a liar twice. My name is Zhang Ruowen. I was the wife of Shen Jinyan for 11 years. I was his classmate in high school, his study partner in university, his fiancé at 21, his wife at 23, his cover story at 32, and his ex-wife at 34. I died at 35. I came back to 29. And I want to tell you calmly what I learned in between, because I did not come back kinder. I came back organized. Before the rules, I understand the shape of the marriage because every law I wrote was forged against something specific. Shen Jinyan was the only son of a family that owned a mid-sized logistics company in the Port District. He was clever but not disciplined, charming but not generous, handsome in a way that made people assume things about his character that he did not actually possess. He had been diagnosed with a severe shellfish allergy at the age of 9 after a single prawn at a cousin's wedding had nearly killed him. His mother, Mrs. Shen Weili, has spent the following 20 years doing what many Chinese mothers of frail sons do, which was slowly convincing herself that her son was not as fragile as his childhood had suggested. By the time he was 20, she was telling people he had grown out of it. He had not. He had married a wife who carried the EpiPen. That wife was me. For 11 years, I was the invisible mechanism of my husband's survival. I was also, for the last 3 of those years, the invisible mechanism of his affair. Her name was Wen Lixia. She was 25 when they met, a marketing assistant at his company, pretty in a restless, performative way, the kind of woman who laughs loudly to make sure the right people hear her. She began sleeping with my husband 6 months after she was hired. She continued sleeping with him for 3 years. During those 3 years, she did not once ask him about his allergies. She did not once check a menu for him. She did not once carry an EpiPen in her handbag. She did not need to, because I was still doing it for both of them. Let me tell you what that cost me.
And because it is the foundation of the rulebook. The first time I saved his life after the affair began, we were at a client dinner at a Cantonese restaurant. The chef had garnished a chicken dish with a shrimp paste reduction I could smell from across the table. I leaned over, I whispered. I switched his plate with mine before he lifted his chopsticks. He did not even notice. He spent the evening flirting with his assistant's friend and texting, I later learned, with Wen Lixia. The second time, we were at a charity gala. The dessert table featured a tiramisu made with a shellfish-based gelatin supplier I had researched on his mother's behalf 3 years earlier. I intercepted him before he reached the plate. He told me, sharply, to stop making a scene. His mother, watching from across the room, agreed. I ate my own dessert quietly.
At the third time, it was a family dinner at his mother's house. Mrs. Shen had, in her campaign to prove her son had grown out of it, ordered a seafood stew as a surprise. I noticed it from the kitchen doorway and quietly diverted the dish to a serving plate that stayed at the opposite end of the table, claiming I was allergic to the scent. My husband laughed about my dramatic allergies for a week afterward. I did not correct him. The fourth time, I was in the hospital myself. I had appendicitis. It was serious. I was recovering from surgery. My husband attended an industry dinner that evening, unchaperoned, with Wenlixia. He ate a crab cake. His throat began to close at 11 at night. Wenlixia panicked. She did not have an EpiPen. She did not know what he was allergic to, despite 3 years of sleeping with him. As she called like his mother called like me. I discharged like myself against medical advice at midnight, drove across the city with stitches in my abdomen, arrived at the private clinic at 1 in the morning, and administered the injection that saved his life. He was unconscious. He did not know I had been there. His mother told him the next morning that Wenlixia had saved him. She said it to protect his pride. Wenlixia did not correct her. That was the last time I saved him. 6 weeks later, he asked me for a divorce. He said our marriage had grown cold. He said Wenlixia understood him in a way I no longer did. His mother said, at a family meeting convened to discuss the separation, that perhaps I had become too controlling, that my constant hovering had exhausted him, that I had, in her words, had made a man feel like a patient in his own home. Wenlixia, in her version, told people that I had been emotionally neglectful for years and that she had simply filled a space I had abandoned. The story that took hold across every room I had ever walked into was that I was the cold wife who had driven a kind husband into the arms of a warmer woman. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. I got the small apartment I had bought in my own name 3 years before the marriage, which Wenlixia tried to contest and failed. I got none of the Shen family assets because the prenup had been sealed by his mother's lawyer, and I had, foolishly, signed it at 23 without a lawyer of my own. I got a reputation as a bitter ex-wife who could not accept being left for someone younger. I got, eventually, a small rented room in a different city where I worked a job beneath my qualifications and tried to stop checking the weather for him out of habit. I developed a cough in the winter. I ignored it because I did not have good insurance. It became pneumonia. I died in late February in the rented room, alone, at 35 years old. My husband did not die. He married Wenlixia 6 weeks after my death. At their wedding banquet, in a detail his mother later told a relative with tears of joy, the catering team had been specifically instructed to prepare a shrimp and scallop platter as a centerpiece, because Wenlixia believed my allergy paranoia had limited her husband's life for 11 years, and she wanted to celebrate his freedom. He did not eat the platter. He had, by then, quietly resumed carrying his own EpiPen, which he had bought from a pharmacy the week after the divorce, because without me, he had finally understood that his allergy was real. He never thanked me. Not at the wedding. Not ever. Then I opened my eyes, and I was 29, and my husband was still my husband, and the affair had already been going on for 6 months, and I had 5 years ahead of me in which, in my first life, I had saved him 4 times. I sat up in bed. I did not cry. I did not shake. I looked at the EpiPen in my bedside drawer, and I closed the drawer, and I wrote the first rule. Rule 1, never warn a liar twice. The first time my first life husband lied to me, he told me he was at a business dinner, and he was at Wenlixia's apartment. I found out by accident 3 months later from a parking receipt, and I confronted him. He apologized. As he said it would not happen again. He lied a second time 3 weeks later about a trip to Shanghai. I forgave him. He lied to me, by my final count, 147 times over 3 years. I warned him, gently or sharply, at least 9 of those times. Each warning made him better at the lying, not better at the honesty. In the second life, I did not warn him about anything. Not the lying, not the affair, not the EpiPen I stopped refilling, not the restaurant list I stopped maintaining, not the emergency contact card I stopped carrying in my handbag. I simply stopped. The first application of Rule 1 came 3 weeks after my return. We were at a sushi restaurant. I was not going to eat sushi because I had stopped eating sushi the year he was diagnosed. Out of solidarity, a habit I now quietly abandoned. I ordered the salmon. I ordered it raw. I placed my handbag on the empty chair beside me, where for 11 years the EpiPen had sat ready. The handbag was empty of that particular item. I had not refilled his prescription. The last one in our household had expired 8 months earlier, in the first life's timeline, and I had quietly let it expire this time too. He ordered a plate of mixed nigiri. He ate 3 pieces before I noticed the green flecks on one of them, which were not scallion. They were a finely chopped raw scallop garnish the kitchen had added without noting it on the menu. In my first life, I would have seen it within 2 seconds. I would have reached across the table. I would have said, "Jinyin, don't." This time, I did not look up from my phone. He ate the 4th piece. His face began to redden after about 90 seconds. Yeah, his breathing changed. He said a little sharply, "Ruowen, where's the pen?" I said, without looking up, "I must have forgotten it. Perhaps the waiter can call an ambulance." He looked at me. For perhaps the first time in 11 years, he looked at me with his full attention. The waiter was already moving. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes, which was a long 7 minutes. He lived. He was hospitalized for 2 days. He was furious. He accused me in the hospital room of carelessness. I said quietly, "Darling, you have told me for years that you've grown out of this. I believed you. I must have absorbed your confidence." His mother visited. She tried to scold me. I let her. The rule had done its work. He began carrying his own EpiPen the following week, which meant that when 6 months later, when Lixia nearly killed him at a private dinner, he survived it himself, and he survived it without my involvement, which was the point. I was no longer the mechanism. The mechanism had moved to his own pocket, where it should have been all along. Rule 2. A shared name does not mean shared loyalty. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Shen Wei Li, was the second betrayer. She was, in some ways, the more painful one, because she had pretended to love me for 11 years. She had called me her good daughter at family dinners. She had cried at my wedding. She had given me, on my 30th birthday in the first life, a jade bracelet that had belonged to her own mother. And she had, at the family meeting where my divorce was discussed, stood in her own dining room and described me as controlling and exhausting, and the kind of wife who makes a man feel like a patient. I had given her the bracelet back in tears. She had kept it. She had given it 6 months after my death to Wen Lixia at their engagement party. In this second life, I visited my mother-in-law 3 days after my return. I brought her favorite tea. I sat in her sunroom. I let her complain about her blood pressure, about her maid, about the Shen family's aging uncle in Singapore. I listened warmly. I said very little. Then I left. I went directly to my lawyer, a woman named Mrs. Ning Ruoqing, whom I had hired in the second life with money I had withdrawn, quietly, from a joint account when Lixia did not know about. I asked Mrs. Ning to do 3 things. First, to review my prenup for any clauses that could be challenged on grounds of spousal misrepresentation, because I had, at the time of signing, been told by Mrs. Shen's lawyer that standard terms had been used, and I now wished to verify. Second, to quietly prepare and hold undated a full divorce filing with financial claims based on the extensive documentation of marital assets I had been keeping in my own records for 9 years. Third, to request a private audit of my husband's company's internal accounts, because Mrs. Shen had, in the first life, used the chaos of the divorce to transfer a small but meaningful block of company shares to Wen Lixia as a welcome gift, and I wanted that block frozen in advance. Mrs. Ning asked, as she had asked before, what I was really doing. I said, "I am not trying to save my marriage. Yeah, I am building the version of me that exists after it ends." She nodded. She began work that afternoon. Rule 2 became active the following month. Mrs. Shen invited me to lunch at her club. She wanted, she said, to discuss something delicate. She wanted me to sign, voluntarily, an amendment to our marital property agreement. The amendment adjusted the allocation of the apartment I had purchased in my own name before the marriage, shifting a portion of its paper ownership into a family holding trust for tax efficiency. She framed it as routine. She was charming. She touched my hand. In my first life, I had signed this amendment. I had trusted her. That signature was the mechanism through which she had later stripped me of the apartment's full value during the divorce. because the holding trust had reserved certain family rights of consultation over any sale, which she had then blocked. This time I read the amendment. I told her warmly that I would love to sign it, but that Mrs. Ning had recently advised me to route any marital asset adjustment through her firm for consistency with the original prenup structure. I said this with a small apologetic smile. I said I was sure she understood. Mrs. Shen's hand did not move from mine, but her smile adjusted just slightly at the corners. She understood perfectly. She said, "Of course, darling, of course, take your time." She never raised the amendment again. She did not need to. She understood in that moment that the version of me she had been planning to manage no longer existed. She did not yet know what had replaced me. A shared name. And I reminded myself over tea that afternoon does not mean shared loyalty. It only means shared paperwork. Rule 3. The woman they call unstable is the woman refusing the script. In my first life, by the end of the marriage, I had been called jealous, controlling, paranoid, emotionally unavailable, neurotic about minor health issues, and difficult to live with. The labels had been assigned over years. By my husband, by his mother, by Wenlixia, by his cousin's wife who had become friendly with Wenlixia, by 2 of my own friends who had been pulled into his social orbit. The labels had not stuck because they were true. They had stuck because I had, every time one was applied, attempted to argue against it. Every defense had been treated as evidence. You see, she's defensive, she's unstable, she can't let anything go. In this life,
I stopped defending. When my husband, 3 months after the sushi incident, accused me at a dinner of being weirdly cold lately, I did not explain. I smiled. I said, "But perhaps I am, darling." When his mother, 2 months after the amendment discussion, told a mutual friend that I had become difficult to read, I did not call her to clarify. I let it circulate. When Wenlixia, 6 months into my second life, began appearing at social events where I was present, and said to a mutual acquaintance within my earshot that I had always been a little cold, I did not turn around. I simply ordered another glass of wine from the waiter, smiled at the woman seated beside me, and continued my conversation about her daughter's kindergarten. Every label they had prepared for me required my participation. Jealousy required me to look jealous.
Instability required me to become hysterical. Coldness required me to prove I was warm. When I stopped providing the performance, the labels began to sound, in the mouths of the people repeating them, like exactly what they were. Repetition without evidence. By the 8th month of the second life, 2 of my friends who had drifted toward Wenlixia in the first timeline had, in this timeline, quietly drifted back. Not because I had done anything to recover them, but because the script they had been fed required a version of me that I was refusing to be, and when the version did not appear, the script stopped being interesting. The woman they call unstable, I wrote in my notebook, is the woman refusing the script. She is not breaking. She is simply declining to audition for her own replacement. Rule 4. A. Never save a house that was built to bury you. For 11 years, I had been the invisible mechanism of the Shen family's survival. I had managed Mrs. Shen's medication schedule because she had refused a nurse. I had reviewed the household accounts because my husband had no patience for them. I had drafted the annual New Year's letter to the Singapore uncle because no one else in the family wrote presentable Mandarin. I had negotiated the household staff disputes. I had once spent 3 weeks personally researching a tax restructuring that saved the Shen Logistics Company approximately 11 million yuan, a restructuring my husband had later presented to his mother as his own idea. In this life, I stopped, not theatrically. I simply let things lapse. I stopped ordering Mrs. Shen's medication. She discovered 2 weeks later that her blood pressure prescription had run out, and she had to contact her doctor's office herself for the first time in 6 years. It inconvenienced her. She complained to my husband, who shrugged. I stopped reviewing the household accounts. My husband, who had outsourced this task to me so completely he did not remember he had done so, noticed 3 months later that the housekeeper had been quietly overcharging for groceries for half a year. He was furious. He fired her. The housekeeper, who had been with the family for 8 years, told her sister it was my fault for no longer double-checking the receipts. The sister, as it happened, worked as a maid for Wenlixia's aunt, and the story made its way back to Wenlixia, who began telling people that I had let the house fall apart out of spite. I did not correct her. I let the story circulate. Rule 3 was still active. I stopped drafting the New Year's letter. The Singapore uncle did not receive one that year. He wrote to my mother-in-law in February asking if the family was well. She was embarrassed. She blamed the household staff. I stopped researching tax restructurings for the company. This was the quietest of the omissions and the most consequential. In my first life, I had been the one who noticed a regulatory change in cross-port tariff reporting that would have exposed the Shen Logistics Company to a significant back tax liability if not addressed. I had, in that first life, addressed it quietly by flagging it to my husband's CFO, who had restructured the accounts in time. In this life, I did not flag it. The change took effect. The company's auditors missed it. 6 months later, the tax authority opened a preliminary review. The liability had grown with penalties to somewhere around 18 million yuan. My husband was not criminally exposed. His family could cover the cost, but the shine on the company dimmed considerably. 2 minor investors, noting the audit, quietly reduced their positions. The company's cash flow tightened. Mrs. Shen's welcome gift to Wenlixia, the small block of company shares she had been planning to transfer in the first timeline, became less generous by virtue of simply being worth less. Rule 4 was not active sabotage. I had not harmed them. I had simply stopped harming myself on their behalf. The house they lived in had been resting without their knowledge, on 11 years of my unpaid labor. I stopped holding it up. It did not fall. It leaning. As any builder will tell you, is sometimes enough. Rule 5. Not every person you love deserves one more warning. This rule hurt to write. It hurt to follow. My husband's younger sister, Shenjia Yue, had been 17 when I married into the family. She had been sweet and awkward and lonely, the overlooked second child of a mother who had poured all her ambition into her son. I had treated Jiayue like my own sister. I had helped her with her university applications. I had taken her shopping for her first professional suits. I had listened to her cry about her first 3 relationships. She had sent me a card on every one of my 11 birthdays as Mrs. Shen, hand-drawn, carefully written. In my first life, during the divorce, Jia Yue had been quietly pressured by her mother to testify in a family meeting. At that, she had observed my controlling behavior toward her brother. She had agreed. She had done it. She had cried while doing it. She had cried for an hour afterward in my apartment, apologizing. I had forgiven her. I had told her that her mother had put her in an impossible position. I had tried for the following 6 months to remain in contact with her because I felt she was another victim of the Shen family's gravity. She had eventually stopped replying to my messages because Mrs. Shen had convinced her that staying in touch with me was emotionally unhealthy. In this second life, one rainy afternoon, Jiayu showed up at my apartment. She was 27 now. She was engaged. She was crying. She had discovered, she said, that her fiancé had been lying to her about a previous marriage. She did not know what to do. She had come to me because, she said through her tears, I had always been the only person in the family who had been honest with her. For a long moment, I almost stepped back into the first life version of myself. I almost sat her down. I almost told her kindly about the patterns she was missing, about the red flags her mother would excuse, about the way the Shen women had been trained to swallow the truth if it inconvenienced the family. I almost became, for an hour, the older sister she needed. Then I remembered the family meeting. I remembered her voice, small and apologetic, telling 15 people that I had been controlling. I remembered the 6 months of unreturned messages. I remembered that in my first life, after my death, Ijayue had attended my husband's wedding to Winlixia and had given a toast describing her new sister-in-law as the sister I always wanted. I made her tea. I listened for 10 minutes. I said gently, "Jayue, I am sorry this is happening to you. I think you should talk to your mother." Her face changed. She said, "Mother won't understand. She never understands." I said, "She understands more than she says. You will learn that one day." I did not tell her what to do. I did not warn her about her fiancé's patterns. I did not offer to help her investigate him. I made her tea, I let her cry for 20 minutes, and then I walked her to the door and I wished her well. She left confused. She had expected the first life version of me. I had given her a version she did not know how to use. Rule 5 does not mean I stopped loving Jayue. It means I stopped confusing my love for her with my obligation to protect her from a family she would, in the end, always choose over me. Her fiancé turned out to be exactly what she feared. She married him anyway. She divorced him 3 years later. She did not come back to me. I did not expect her to. Pity, I wrote in my notebook that night, is not proof they changed. Missing who they were is not a reason to ignore who they are. Rule 6. Confidence makes liars sloppy. By the 10th month of my second life, my husband and Winlixia believed they had secured their future. My withdrawal from household affairs had convinced them I was emotionally checked out. The tax audit had stressed the company, but had not destroyed it. Mrs. Shen had, in her version of events, quietly managed my decline into difficulty with the family's signature grace. Winlixia had been promoted twice through my husband's influence and was now openly introduced at social events as his close personal associate. They decided in the 11th month to hold an engagement party, not for their own engagement, not yet. My husband was still technically married to me, and Mrs. Shen, for reasons of public face, was unwilling to accelerate the divorce until after a family wedding in the summer. The engagement party was, officially, for Wen Lixia and a new fiancé, a harmless businessman named Tang Jilei, whom she had agreed to briefly be engaged to as a cover for her continued presence in the Shen social circle. Tang Jilei did not know he was a cover. Tang Jilei believed himself in love. As the party was to be held at a large private event space connected to the Shen family home. My husband was to attend as a family friend of the bride. Mrs. Shen was to host. I was invited, because excluding me would have caused comment. In my first life, I had not been invited to any such party. In my first life, I had already been divorced by this date. In this life, I was still Mrs. Shen on paper. And the timing of the second life's events had shifted the social calendar, and the result was an engagement party where my husband's mistress was publicly pretending to marry another man while my husband pretended to attend as a friend. The confidence on display was exquisite. When Lixia had grown careless, she believed her position so secure that she had begun introducing herself in conversation with junior staff at my husband's company. As the next Mrs. Shen, she had said this to a junior accountant 3 weeks before the party. The junior accountant had mentioned it over drinks to a senior accountant. The senior accountant had mentioned it in a memo to the internal auditor. The internal auditor had passed the memo through a channel Mrs. Ning had quietly cultivated 6 months earlier into a file that now sat on her desk, alongside a growing collection of similar careless statements, receipts, and small confessions that Wenlixia had scattered across the preceding year like a woman who believed no one was collecting. The party was held on a Saturday in October. The catering was elaborate. Wenlixia had, in a moment of particular confidence, personally approved the menu, which featured as a centerpiece a tower of fresh prawns arranged on ice. And I attended in a gray silk dress. I did not wear the jade bracelet Mrs. Shen had given me. I had returned it to her quietly a month earlier in a box with a brief note. She had not responded. She did not know yet that she would, in 3 weeks' time, be unable to retrieve it for Wenlixia because the bracelet was already in a safe deposit box in Mrs. Ning's office, on a clause that held it in trust until the finalization of my divorce settlement. I took a glass of champagne. I stood by a pillar. I watched. My husband, at approximately 9 in the evening, accepted a plate from Wenlixia that contained 3 prawns. He accepted it with a small, private smile. Wenlixia smiled back. Tang Jilei, 3 feet away, was talking to Mrs. Shen about real estate. My husband ate 1 prawn. He noticed too late what he was eating. He had, by this point in the second life, been carrying his own EpiPen for nearly 10 months. He reached for it. It was not in his pocket. When Lixia, earlier in the evening, had asked him to leave it in his jacket in the coat room because she said it ruined the line of his suit, his throat began to close. Rule 6 locked into place. Confidence had made her sloppy. She had built a tower of prawns. She had removed his pen. She had been so certain of her ownership of him that she had asked him to surrender the single object that kept him alive, and she had asked him to do it at a party where she was pretending to marry another man. I did not move. I did not carry a pen in my handbag anymore. I did not know the nearest hospital's number by heart anymore. I watched from beside the pillar as my husband staggered. I watched Wenlixia scream. I watched Tang Jilei, who did not know what was happening, try to help. I watched Mrs. Shen's face, which contained in a single instant the realization that her son was dying, that her son's mistress was the cause, and that her son's wife was standing 20 feet away, doing nothing. He lived. A doctor was present at the party. The doctor administered an injection from his own medical bag. My husband was taken to the hospital. He was there for 3 days. But the party had ended, and the party had ended in a specific way. With Wenlixia holding a plate of prawns, Tang Jilei weeping in confusion, Mrs. Shen screaming at a caterer, and me standing calmly beside a pillar holding a glass of champagne. 40 guests had seen it. 40 guests had also seen Wenlixia feed him the prawn with the affection of a fiancé. 40 guests had also heard her scream his name in a voice no woman uses for her married boss. 40 guests went home that night with a story, and the story, unlike every story told about me in my first life, did not require me to defend myself to become indelible. Rule 7. Winning is not getting them back. Winning is making their access to you impossible.
This is the rule I saved for last, because this is the rule that freed me. Mrs. Ning filed the divorce papers on Monday morning. They had been waiting in her drawer for 11 months. The filing was accompanied by the audit documentation, the internal memos, the sworn statement from the junior accountant, the hospital records from the sushi incident and the party, the list of the 17 social events at which Wenlixia had been photographed with my husband, and a formal petition for the full return of my premarital apartment, my personal savings, and the portion of marital assets to which I was entitled under the original, unamended prenup. My husband, recovering in the hospital, received the papers on Tuesday. Mrs. Shen, summoned by her son, attempted to negotiate on Wednesday. She came to my apartment.
As she brought the jade bracelet, which she had apparently retrieved from somewhere else, not knowing that the original was in my safe deposit box. She cried. She said that we could resolve this quietly. She said that she had always loved me as a daughter. She said that when Lixia had been a mistake that had spiraled. She asked me what I wanted. I said, "Mother, I do not want anything from you anymore. I only want you to close the door on your way out." She said, "Rowan, please, think of the family." I said, "I have, for 11 years. Please leave." She left. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. I received the apartment in full, the savings, and a settlement that represented, by Mrs. Ning's calculation, fair compensation for 11 years of uncredited labor in the Shen household. The company,
weakened by the audit and the social fallout from the engagement party, was unable to contest the settlement without risking further exposure. My husband signed the papers in Mrs. Ning's office with a hand that still trembled slightly from his hospitalization. When Lixia was not present, Tang Jilei had broken the fake engagement the day after the party, and she had, in the weeks that followed, lost her position at the Shen company, her apartment lease, and her standing in the social circles she had spent 3 years infiltrating. She moved to a smaller city. Her last known employment was at a cosmetics counter in a second-tier department store. My husband did not marry her. My husband did not marry anyone for several years. He lived after the divorce with his mother, who aged noticeably in the 18 months that followed. Jia Yue,
who had attended the divorce proceedings as a silent observer at her mother's insistence, never contacted me again. I did not expect her to. Rule 5 was still active. The rules locked together the way a well-built lock locks. Rule 1 stopped me from warning him about the sushi. Rule 2 stopped me from signing the amendment. Rule 3 stopped me from performing the labels they needed. Rule 4 stopped me from holding up a house that was built to bury me. Rule 5 stopped me from saving Jia Yue from a family she would keep choosing. Rule 6 let Wenlixia's confidence destroy her faster than any accusation I could have made. Rule 7 closed the door. I did not win the marriage. I did not want the marriage. I won my own door. The quiet aftermath. I moved 6 months after the divorce and to a smaller apartment in a coastal city where I had no family and no history. I took a job at a mid-sized consulting firm in a role I would have been too senior for in my first life, and I let myself be senior for it in this one. I did not remarry. I did not date. I did not need to. I had spent 11 years being married to a man I was, in effect, keeping alive. The silence of an apartment where no one needed me to carry anything in my handbag was, for the first 2 years, the most luxurious thing I had ever owned. On my 33rd birthday, which in my first life had been the last birthday my husband had remembered, I bought myself a small cake and ate it alone at my kitchen table with a cup of tea. I did not cry. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the particular,
specific peace of a woman who has stopped being someone else's load-bearing wall. I kept the notebook with the rules. I put it in a drawer. I did not need to open it anymore. The rules had become the way I lived. They no longer needed to be written down. Once, about a year after the divorce, I ran into my husband by accident in the lobby of a hotel in another city where I was attending a business conference. He saw me. He walked toward me. I watched him try to compose in real time the sentence he had been rehearsing for 18 months. Something about regret, something about youth, something about a mistake. Before he could speak, I said, "Jinyan, whatever you are about to say, I want you to understand that I do not owe you the courtesy of hearing it." I walked past him. I did not turn around. He did not follow.
And that was the last time I saw him. I did not come back to save him. I came back to write the rules he had spent 11 years teaching me I was not allowed to have. And the day I stopped breaking them for his comfort was the day his entire world finally learned what I had always been holding up.